welcome to another episode of C3 Arts Radio. C3 Arts Radio will be right back.
Loving you so, I was too blind to see you letting me go. But now that you've set me free, it's gonna take a miracle. Yes, it's gonna take a miracle to make me love someone new. 'Cause I'm crazy for you. Oh, didn't you know it wouldn't be so easy? You letting me go. You can be sure that now it's gonna take a miracle. Yes, it's gonna take a miracle to make me love someone new. 'Cause I'm crazy for you. Oh, no, I know I can't forget about you. I'm gonna try to show you how much you're turning me around, destroying me. I'll never be the same as before you. Oh, must realize you took your love and left me caught by surprise. You can be sure that now it's gonna take a miracle. Yes, it's gonna take a miracle to make me love someone new. 'Cause I'm crazy for you. Oh, it's gonna take a miracle. Yes, it's gonna take a miracle to make me love someone new. 'Cause I'm crazy for you. I'm crazy for you. Take a miracle to make me love someone new. 'Cause I'm crazy for you. You wanna make me blue. It's gonna take a miracle. Yeah, it's gonna take a miracle to make me love someone new.
Juega. Jugué al amor. Jugué al amor. Tiempo perdido tan solo fue una ilusión. Jugué al amor. Jugué al amor. Le entregué mi corazón a aquella mujer ingrata que el día menos pensado me lo supo destrozar. Me dijo adiós. Me dijo adiós. Yo no le guardo rencor, solo tengo sentimiento, solo tengo sentimiento de concederle perdón. Como dice aquel refrán, como dice aquel refrán, que el que pierde y algo aprende, nada pierde, nada pierde. ¡Ya!
Maldición,
Maldición,
el haberte conocido.
estamos empaquetados ya, cada uno por su lado me dijo, ay qué maldición, maldición, el haberte conocido. ¡Maldito sea! ¡Majayo de falta! Maldición, el haberte conocido, castígala, que sea su merecido. Ay, qué maldición, maldición, el haberte conocido. ¡Ay, no! Maldición, maldición, maldición.
C3 Arts Radio and
Maldición, maldición, maldición.
C3 Arts Radio. We're back, ladies and gentlemen. It's been an eventful beginning of the show, but
Just one of those days. How do I sound?
live radio at its most how would I say?
It happened.
But we're here, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, this is C3 Arts Radio. We're coming live and direct to you. Of course, it's live. That's why it sounds like this. But anyway, we are going to make up for that. We have a fantastic show. And, of course, we're coming to you, as always, from the campus of City College, New York. Of course, the college on the Hill. And we are the broadcast arm of the City College Center for the Arts. And I am your loyal host, Philip Harvey, and I have with me today, of course, our fantastic, lovely co-host, Tony the Tiger. How are you today, Tony?
Hi, I'm great.
I'm glad you're doing well. I'm glad you're doing well.
Yes.
Yeah, you like our new digs here, our temporary digs?
I know, this is interesting. It's amazing.
We're in another part of the WHCR studio. Of course, you know that we have this lovely, fantastic studio, so we've been able to expand and make more use of it. So we're using a different studio today, hence some of the troubles that we've been having. However, I think we've got them all behind us, and we're ready to get started here.
Yeah, let's
Your
get started.
place for arts advocacy, always and forever, right here, C3 Arts Radio. And Tony, it's interesting today in and of itself. I know that originally we had somewhat of a different show planned. Will Packer was going to join us, but unfortunately he fell sick today.
Yeah, he's been traveling a lot, so I think after a while. He has the Being Mary Jane premiere tonight, and Girls Trip comes out on Friday.
And Girls Trip comes out on Friday.
Yes, and I am so excited.
Yeah, just think about this. Will Packer, this man has already 8 films which have opened and debuted at #1.
Wow.
And his films in gross have amassed over $1 billion worldwide. It's pretty amazing, right?
It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, he's a young cat.
And he's a fun, really fun, cool guy.
Yeah. So
But I think what I find most interesting is the fact that he does these films that show African American women in such an interesting, diverse light. And that's why I'm really excited about this Girls Trip movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, when I look at the trailers, I see like Jada Pinkett in a role, like a type of role I've never seen her in before. She's doing comedy. I think. And then you have this new actress, Tiffany Haddish.
Yeah, I've been hearing quite the buzz on her. She's
my
she's the breakaway
goodness.
hit off the show, right?
Yeah. I think her hashtag is She Ready. But I mean, everyone I've known who has seen the film already are saying like it's like the best film of the year, hands down.
Is that right? Well, before these films are released, I try to go and see what the critics are saying. Not that I am totally all into other critics, even though I can be somewhat critical myself. And the response has been phenomenal, so it's quite exciting. It looks like he may have the ninth debut on his hands. So,
I'm sure.
So, Will, if you're listening out there, get well. And,
Get felt better, Will.
And we'll look forward to having you back on the show another time.
But wait, I've been hearing, and I put it on my posts, that we have to wear a panty liner. Well, men can't wear a panty liner, but we have to wear a Depends or something. Like everyone's saying, you'll laugh so much you might have an accident.
I was wondering where you go with that. Okay.
I'm kind of nervous though. I was like, are you guys serious?
Yeah, well, I hope it's funny. We'll see.
Yeah.
On that note, though, we do have a great show planned and lined up for you today, ladies and gentlemen. We have Grace Aniza Ali,
Yes.
who, along some of the same lines as you might find in a film like Girls Trip, where you do have this kind of camaraderie between women of color. It's very symmetrical that we will have Grace Aniza Ali on the show today. She is the founder and editor of Note Magazine, as well as a host of other things that we'll get into in a moment. And one of her primary focuses is on the relationship and the building of the dynamic and the play upon the strength of women of color across nationality and across a lot of the boundaries that we generally tend to put on people from a different supposed demographic. So we're going to be right back. We're going to get back here. We're going to have Grace Aniza Ali with us. Of course, this is a C3 Arts Radio.
Believe in me, my heart is beating. Girl, since I've lost my own control, you've been misbehaving, and I can hear it in your voice. Girl, my heart aching. You left someone watching you. You think it's easy, and that's what caused me to believe you. You made me promise that you didn't keep. And that's the reason why this heart of mine keeps on skipping beating. My heart is beating. Since I've lost my own choice, as you see, you've been behaving, and I can hear it in your voice. I can do my heart beating. Believe me. The thing you thought I just can't forget. And this love of mine needs to be resurrected. You pick me up with my heart. A lot of medicine. My heart is aching. You left somebody heart aching. My heart is beating. I can't forget. God is not mine. It's to resurrect.
C3 Arts Radio, and we're back.
Yeah.
We're back. We're always back, ladies and gentlemen. And even though we're having some mechanical difficulties, we know how to keep it moving and going forward. Of course, this is C3 Arts Radio, the broadcast arm of the City College Center for the Arts. As we were talking a little bit before about the kind of reach and breadth of films like the Coming, Girls Night,
Girls Trip.
Girls Trip, I'm sorry.
But you can go see Girls Trip on a girls' night out.
Exactly.
Ooh, you like that.
Exactly. Which has as it's one of its primary kind of focuses this relationship between desperate women, right? And in this case, of course, women of color
I'm sorry.
who are more underlined in terms of their personalities, right?
Did you read? Where did you get the desperate part from? Is that in the review?
Not desperate as a DESP, disparate, as in different.
I'm like, what did you say, you man?
No, we're not. Desperate is not.
I mean, they do look horny in the trailers, but come on.
Okay, there we go with this one. All right, okay. Well, our guest for today, Miss Grace Aniza Ali, has, in a very short time, put together probably one of the most informed platforms. Of course, I'm talking about Of Note Magazine, which is an online journal which really occupies the space between art and activism. She herself has spent a great deal of time dealing with issues that impact not only let's say women of color or kind of ideas, not just gender issues, but also ideas of how people relate across national boundaries, but a really keen eye for transnational issues. And also she has an exhibition currently at the Caribbean Cultural Institute. This exhibition, which I believe is open till about the middle of October, is one of the special gems that we have on the cultural landscape in New York. So we are very, very happy to have Grace Aniza Ali join us. How are you today, Grace?
Philip, I'm going to hire you to be my official spokesperson. That was the best concise plug.
Yes, all right. Okay,
Right.
good.
Concise
Hey.
is the right word. Right? 'Cause
Loved it.
You're
And
so
he-
accomplished.
And ladies and gentlemen, he has no notes. That's just like off his memory. That's incredible. It's
Well,
incredible.
That'll be funny because that's the same thing Terrence said, actually. We were having a conversation. Special shout out to the great Terrence McKnight as
Yes.
well, my mentor in chief and a friend to both of us
The
as
great Terrence McKnight. Hi, Terrence.
well. So welcome, Grace. How are you? And I'm glad you're here. We've been trying to get you up here for a while now. So very happy that you could join us today.
Listen, Harlem has been my home for over 10 years. I'm happy to be in conversation with my neighbors always. It's lovely to be here with you both.
Absolutely. And we know this because Tony is our resident Harlem native now. I know that both you and I, Grace, we are from other places. And it's kind of interesting because some of our background, our bios, they intersect in certain places. I know that when you came to the United States from Guyana, your first stop, or your entry point, I should say, was the D.C., Maryland area.
Yes.
And I find that so interesting. One of the things I heard you talk about was how when you got to this area, what we call the DMV now. When you got to the DMV, you were immediately kind of put into a group of foreign nationals. we may term them immigrants in some cases, but they were not only different from different nationalities, but of different circumstances as well. Was this an entry point for you in terms of how you would go on? As we talk more, it'll be very obvious to our audience what I'm saying. But is this a kind of an entry point into this kind of very broad global perspective that you've developed? How did that transition going from your childhood in Guyana to this area where you're almost immediately put into these social and other kinds of situations with people from around the world?
Wow, that's a really great question. So, my mother had a choice when we were leaving Guyana to raise her family here in New York or in the DMV area, the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, where she had one sister. Mm-hmm. And this was 1990s New York. So this was Giuliani's New York, and she had been to New York once before, and she was like, I'm not raising my children in that New York. So instead of coming here, we ended up in Maryland, and I always joke with her that I still ended up in New York anyways. But I do think about how remarkably different, the experience was, because New York City, immigrants or an immigrant culture is such a norm in this city. Mm-hmm. And I think in a lot of ways, if you are an immigrant in the United States, if there is a city to be in to sort of ease that transition, it's New York City. So we didn't get that thanks to my mother saying no to New York. We instead got the DC, Maryland area. And I really loved growing up there. It's a beautiful place. But remember at the time, in the 1990s, what DC knew of diversity, really. I mean, DC was still called Chocolate City.
Right, that's right. Absolutely.
In 1995, and their idea of diversity was essentially the African American community. So if you didn't fit into the white community or the African American community, then what you had is this hodgepodge of everyone else. So the Ethiopian community, the Asian community, the Caribbean community, it was just a mixture of that. And my high school was the same way. So I think that is where I got the sense of, instead of being sort of isolated to she's Guyanese and being in a Guyanese community, I was just, no, I'm in an international community, because we all just kind of stuck together.
Right, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of interesting. I think you find that a lot with transnationals. They kind of find themselves in this community of people from all over the world that kind of operates parallel to the home community. When I lived in Asia, I kind of had the same experience.
Where in Asia were you?
I lived in Tokyo and Hong Kong.
Oh my gosh!
And it was a lot of it was a similar experience in that sense, in that you really kind of made a family out of the kind of transnationals that were there as well. Yeah, so it's quite interesting. So but where does this spark start? So, and then we'll get into a little bit of where we're kind of building up to to the kind of vast operation that you're running now. And I do mean the term vast operation, but where does it develop where you start to kind of think about these issues? I know there's at one point where you get to Fulbright, you go to India, but there seems to be a building up to this of a kind of an awareness of what is happening in the world. Is coming to the United States, is that a point where this starts to trigger, where you start to understand just how large the world is?
I think the United States, in which I'm incredibly grateful for. I hear the rhetoric about immigrants in this country now, and it really disheartens me, because as an immigrant, I'm so grateful for what the United States has given me that I wouldn't have gotten had I stayed in Guyana, as much as I love Guyana, right? So the United States gave me, I think, the resources and the education and the tools to do what I'm doing now. But that heart space for it started from where I was born.
Right.
So that sort of sympathy or empathy or care for people that are in impoverished conditions, or the situation of women and girls, a lack of education for girls, things like that. all of that comes from where I was born and growing up with women who were going through those kinds of things, or having poverty be my norm. You know, so the care part started from the homeland.
Okay.
The tools and the education and the resources to figure out a way how to confront those issues were given to me here in the United States.
I see. I see. And so I saw this discussion that you were having earlier, and I can't remember the host's name of the show from the UDC. And
Ethelbert Miller, yes.
Ethelbert Miller. Of course, I know Ethelbert Miller. I don't know why.
Who doesn't?
I forgot Ethelbert Miller.
Who doesn't?
This guy's quite a legend.
There's an Ethelbert Miller
You have to know
Day.
this guy, Tony, to see
Yes.
him. He's interesting.
It's an Ethelbert Miller Day in D.C.
Oh.
He
Yes.
is an interesting character, and he was talking to you quite a bit about your experience in India, and I thought it was quite fascinating. He was and you said the term that sometimes being a woman of color, but a woman of Indian descent, was a complex choice, or a complex identity, I believe is what you said. That kind of struck with me, and I thought about this kind of idea of building and kind of not sustaining so much, but finding ways to kind of express yourself and understand and feel through the world through a complex identity, and trying to get an idea of what that means. What does that mean to you? What does it mean to you to have a complex identity, so to speak?
Well, if I remember the context of that question from him, so as cliche as this sounds, right? So I went to India in my 20s on this Fulbright, literally to find myself. And I came back more lost than ever. As most people that pack up and move to foreign countries to find themselves end up being more lost than ever. But growing up in Guyana, my family in particular, because we were such a weird but a beautifully weird family, you know, my father's family is Muslim, my mother's family is Hindu, we were raised Pentecostal. I mean, it was just craziness, enough to confuse anybody. So because we didn't really have a connection to our Indian heritage and our Indianness, although, you know, the world sees me and my mother and my sister as Indian women because physically, you know, we look like typical Indian women. We didn't really see ourselves that way, because in Guyana, oddly enough, but also beautifully, you don't identify first by race. And that's something that I actually was really jarred by coming here too as a 14-year-old. Yeah, where the number one question everybody wanted to know from me at 14 was, what are you? I found it so invasive and so harsh, that what, you know, the what, not who are you, but the what are you? So they wanted the what means, you know, my race. Well, how do I identify racially?
Well, in the United States, our whole life is kind of a checkbox.
Yes.
I mean, every single thing from school, hospital, everything, is always a checkbox.
I struggled with that checkbox. My favorite thing was other, because I just didn't know what else to do.
Right. Like, where would you fit on there?
No, I just put other.
I remember the first time I went to England, I was really young, and I went through customs, and it had nationality. So I put African American, and there was actually an Indian woman behind the counter, and she sucked her teeth and she scratched off African and said bloody Americans, and like slammed it and slid it back to me. And I was mortified, because the same in England, they don't.
Yes.
If I'm born in England, I'm English.
Right.
So go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, it's a great point. That box is very othering.
Others people, right?
And it's
Yes.
kind of like, when you think about it, it does feel kind of suppressive when you think about it.
But and then what about all the millions of people that are mixed in this country? You know, like, what do they do with the boxes?
Well, that's a growing question. You know, if you believe me, that's people are
Death to the boxes.
Yeah, people are definitely rebelling against this.
I think you should run for president, and that can be one of your campaigns.
I can't. I wasn't born here. Darn it.
Well, neither was Obama, according to our current president.
I walked right into that one. Yes.
Now, you do find your way to New York, right?
I
You
do.
come here for grad school.
Yes.
And then you go to NYU. Now, it's kind of interesting. So you're here, and I'm kind of trying to build a timeline for our audience. So maybe around 2006 or so, you went to New York. Now, by 2009, you've started what will go on to become not only a very well-read, very respected periodical, but also a digital periodical, but also it grows into a nonprofit organization. So it's something which, seemingly based upon certain principles or a guiding philosophy of yourself, goes from through this medium of the of a journal. It was first an email, right, and then
Yes.
it turns into a journal, and then
Yeah.
it turns to an organization. Tony and I talk all the time on the show. We talk a lot about organization building and kind of cultural entrepreneurship. How did this happen? How did you so quickly move from your point of your graduation to the initial starting of Note to its growth to where it is today? Can you give us a little idea of how this transpired? I know it's a longer story than we have time for.
I'll give you the show. Well, Tony and Philip, I'll be honest with you. I had no desire coming out of NYU to be running a nonprofit nothing. Let's just be real about that.
Right.
I kind of still don't have a desire to do that. But, what has fueled this magazine, what's kept it going, isn't me. It's the response. It's the readers, it's the artists, it's the activists that keep saying to us, we need this, it's important, please continue to do it. We're fully self-funded, and it's a labor of love for me and my team. And we do it for them. We do it for the response. And we do it for, our current issue right now is the gun issue. And you were talking about, my focus on women and women of color. That's also, I'm a bit biased when it comes to anything to do with women and women of color. Sometimes I have to check myself, like, Grace, you just did that yesterday, do something else. But we were thinking about this beast of this issue of the gun violence on bodies of color. I mean, really, that's how the issue started out. I mean, we're all in fatigue at this point. I don't know about you, but it's just fatigue. The headlines and just the incessant nature of this kind of violence.
Oh, well, yeah, and you have an administration which is demonizing women of color and making them the problem, the source of the problems for a lot of their own mistakes and a lot of their own transgressions. And it's quite blatant the way that they are pointing out women of color who are in the guideline, or in the headlines, or people who have in powerful positions are the women who they are targeting as the problematic people in our society.
Right.
So this is and that itself is its own kind of violence. Right?
Yes.
Well, it's really interesting. I was just reading about, I guess it was some 40-year-old woman and a white woman, yoga teacher. Was she a meditation teacher or something in Minnesota? Yeah, Australian-born, was shot. She was behaving erratically, and was shot by the cops.
Yeah.
So I really, and they ruled it a homicide. And I'm interested. I mean, obviously you want justice for everyone, but I kind of feel like if the cop was in the wrong with most likely, if you're encountering an unarmed person with mental illness, you should not shoot them. You wouldn't shoot a dog, So, well, sometimes, but I digress. So I'm just interested in seeing how that plays out, because what if there is a conviction in that case, because a lot of people have been talking about, like, in Beyonce's album, she had that Malcolm X quote where he talks about black women are like the least protected and the least respected in this country. And when you think of who is the most protected, it is white women. So, there's a part of you, you're like, no, you absolutely want justice for her. I don't care what color she is, but I wonder what effect a conviction will have on people of color.
Well, the larger cancer here and what the gun issue, the current issue for the magazine aims to point out, and again, this is an art magazine, an art activism magazine, so we look to artists as the vehicles to confront this issue. So we chose 10 women artists that use the gun as an object within their artistic practices in some shape or form to confront this culture of violence. And so the bigger cancer, I think, whether it's police-sanctioned violence or gang violence or intimate partner violence, is we are a nation obsessed with guns. It's in our every waking moment. It's become so ubiquitous we don't even notice it anymore. It's, our sex life has guns in it. Guns have become this hypersexualized object.
Have they?
Yeah.
Wait, what do you mean?
Well, look, think of the women. Think of movie posters where you see women scantily clad posing with what?
Gun, yeah.
Guns. What message do you think that sends? That guns for women equal power, and guns for women equal sex. There's something really, really just incredible happening now. There are real guns being made, marketed to little girls. They're designed in pink and Hello Kitty stickers and these kinds of things. They're real. They're not fake. They're small little guns that are made to be marketed to our little girls. What are we saying as a society when we make real guns to market to our little girls?
Well,
What
they're
are we
just
teaching them?
They're teaching them early that to be on defense, right? It's us versus them.
Yes.
That's the only reason why you would train a little girl to believe that she needs a gun, because you're
Yes.
teaching her that someone's out to get her.
And think of this, and think of the stupidity of this logic, right? You're arming girls and women to protect themselves from a male culture of violence, when your work should be combating the male culture of violence, not adding to the violence by giving women guns. You see how ridiculous this logic is?
Well,
mean,
Grace, I think
I'm kind of speechless because I'm like, wow, Hello Kitty.
Yes.
I have a question. You brought up art and activism, and of note is really at that space between art and activism. But I was really struck by your definition of the term activism, and I thought it really bore kind of listening to here, because I think it gives another spin on how people should look at an activist and the role that art actually plays in that. What does the term activism actually mean for you?
Philip, remind me what I said. What did I say? So I don't contradict myself.
No. You said that activism, in a sense, is we think of it as a specific kind of action, like it's something. It's a demonstration. It's a gathering of people. It's a kind of constant movement, where really activism can be a sign on the wall. It can be just a made object that signifies a kind of activism. Because especially when it has a statement against some other kind of force that's happening, and that in that the artist is at the forefront of being an activist, even if they, for example, haven't been arrested at a demonstration.
Yes,
or something,
on the front lines, right?
On the front
Yeah.
lines in that way.
Yeah.
And I thought that was quite a kind of a fascinating way of looking at the concept of activism.
Well, yes, at the heart of just the language of activism means to act. So the first part, I think, starts with caring. So you have to care enough about whatever it is about the thing. Like, for example, I'm really obsessive about recycling. And I judge my friends very much if they don't recycle in there. I am very judgmental about it. I'm like,
Well,
do
there-
you recycle?
There are no blue bags in the house.
Yeah,
you
no.
gotta,
I check. Like, I'm very serious about it because, and I go on my spiel and my lecture about everybody can do their part. Just put your paper in the paper bin, your plastic. It's not that complicated. It's very easy. So it's one thing to be like, yes, I care about the planet, but you don't recycle. It's a simple domestic everyday thing. So at the heart of activism is beyond caring about the thing, but acting on it. The acting can be in small ways, or can be large, taking it to the streets, protesting ways. But I think there's room, especially now in our very modern 21st century world, to be activists in many different ways that includes, but it doesn't just only include being on the streets and protesting. So if you're an artist and you care about a particular issue, use your artistic practice to confront that issue. And in that, that's your activism.
I see. So Up Note magazine, we have issues: the gun,
Yes.
the burqa.
Yes.
Yeah.
That got us in a lot of trouble.
Did it
Ooh.
really? The burqa. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, mean tweets and internet trolls and the whole works.
Is that right?
Yes, yes. People don't want to see people don't want to see the other, which is a woman in a burqa is essentially the definition of the other, right? They don't want to see that humanized. They don't want to see anyone give sympathy to that. Especially in the United States, we all want to subscribe to the perspective that these women are oppressed. Let's just all jump on that bandwagon. And the moment you say, "Wait a minute now, how many of you actually ask the women that wear the burqa how they feel about wearing the burqa?" And if you get the same response, fine. But let's actually ask the women that are in this experience about this experience. Let's do that first before we jump to conclusions or jump onto the narrative that makes us more comfortable, which is, oh, they must be oppressed.
Well, that's another box. And Americans, I guess, are trained to like boxes. So if I can,
Exactly.
that's why people will ask you straight off the bat, like, what do you do? How old are you? They need to be able to make a judgment
Yes.
and then put you in that box. So if
Yes.
I made a decision that a burqa is repressive, without even doing any research, then you have to live up to what I've decided and accepted is truth.
And God knows, don't change it, right? Once you've been put in
No.
the box, you can't change it.
No.
Right?
And I have to say, sometimes we do these issues and I'm checked. I'm reminded that I'm biased and I'm not objective as I thought that I was. And the burqa issue was one of those things where it was this huge learning curve for me. I mean, I still have my very strong feelings about women that choose to wear the burqa. However, what I did learn that truly moved me was there's a beauty about modesty that our culture has lost. And that there is the foundation of the philosophy around the burqa for a lot of the women that we spoke to was that as a woman, their body is sacred territory and their body is not for public consumption. Now think about our modern 21st century world where we think we've got to show every bit of skin to be noticed, to get attention, to be sexy. And these women are saying, no, the body is sacred. I choose who gets to consume this body.
That's really funny. I had this conversation with a friend last night, and he talks a lot about how artists, we can, I guess as women, it's hard for us to say I don't like all these guys coming on to me or being treated a certain way. And we talked about Beyonce, for instance, and I was really upset about her not winning any of the big Grammys. And my friend said, but think about it. Before she was pregnant, she was on that same stage, nearly naked, rolling around with her husband. And she doesn't even have to do that. And all of these women, like modern women, they're putting their assets on display.
Wow.
Then you can't really, and I was, I didn't really agree at first. I was just like, well, what do you think they should just dress like Muslims? And he's like, but when you're saying that, like now I'm being educated because the women, I'm feeling convicted. Because it's like the women who are wearing the burqas, they're like, no, this is not my husband telling me that. This is for him. You think of the Method Man song, All I Need to Get By, when he talked about she rocking 3/4 of cloth, never showing my stuff off. And I was growing up, I was like, what does he mean showing his stuff off? So
Possession, right?
yeah, so it's really interesting to hear this.
So on liminal space.
Yes.
Now, this exhibition, it's first of all, it draws upon the art and the work of Guyanese artists,
Yes.
and largely the Guyanese artists are living here in the tri-state area, right? Or living or working here. They're based in some kind of way in the tri-state area, and and there's a whole wide range of the work that they're producing. But it's kind of interesting that if given that New York is sometimes called Little Guyana, yeah, and it has the largest population of the Guyanese diaspora, is it kind of a character as well in the kind of dialogue that's taking place? This kind of dialogue of transference and why do populations kind of move? Why do they stay? And kind of these underlying stories of the exhibition. Does that make New York kind of a big player in that?
Oh, it does. I mean, I think, and I say this, migration is the defining movement of our time. You name me one person that's not been affected by migration, and so Guyana, my homeland, has actually known that experience of migration for the last 5-6 decades, because we've started witnessing this exodus of people beginning in the 1950s to present day. So Guyana has this weird but incredible kind of data where more people live outside of the border of the country than in it.
Yeah.
That's a very rare.
They call this kind of a disappearing state or something.
Yes.
Disappearing nation.
The BBC did a piece earlier this year by another amazing Guyanese cultural scholar, David Aberdeen, that said Guyana is a disappearing nation and that its biggest export are its people. Because there are almost 2 million of us living in places like New York City, in London, in Toronto, and then sprinkled throughout, and about 750,000. So it's a very small country. 750,000 within the border itself.
Mm-hmm.
So why are they leaving?
Well, beginning in the 1950s, impoverished conditions. When you are, I'm very sympathetic towards this actually, but when you've been colonized for so long, and Guyana was a British colony before it gained its independence in 1956.
Is that why?
Yes.
Indian, okay.
So how do you govern yourself? How do you learn what it's like to be an independent state overnight? You don't, right? You don't go from being a colonized country to an independent country overnight.
With no resources.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
That's a process.
Yeah.
And Guyana is only 51 years old. It's a young country. It's a baby country.
Yeah. But we see this with a lot of the decolonized nations, and we think of them as being towards having the maturity that these other nations do, but we still consider the United States a baby. Then what do we say about these countries that are 50, 60 years old?
Exactly.
Exactly. Absolutely. And so it can, we're almost, I can't believe how the time has gone by so fast.
I looked, I was like, oh my God. What do you mean 5:58?
It just sneaks up on us. But I do want to give the exact coordinates. Can you just tell us, and I kind of said that it was going to end the middle of October.
You were right.
Okay, so around the 16th or the 14th. But the Caribbean Cultural Institute, of course, it is in its new home. It is still one of the most dynamic cultural organizations and most important cultural organizations.
By the founder, the amazing Dr. Marta Vega.
Dr. Marta Vega, who I assure you, I promise you, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get up here very soon.
Yes.
So please, make sure you go see this fantastic exhibition. I believe if you go to cccadi.org, you can get all of the information that you need. You can also get more information about Grace Aniza Ali at graceali.com. I believe, is it Grace Ali?
Yes, I am a .com, sadly.
Ofnotemagazine.org as well. She's a conglomerate, let me tell you.
Philip, can I share with your listeners,
Absolutely.
Tuesday the 25th, we're having an artist talk.
Absolutely. Perfect.
At the Caribbean Cultural Center with 3 of the artists that are in the show, Victor Davson, Damali Abrams, and Suchitra Matai. So join us at 6 next Tuesday at the Caribbean Cultural Center.
6 next Tuesday. And you can also always get information. We'll be following up. Make sure you get all the talk, because we kind of didn't talk enough about what's going on. This is a fantastic exhibition, and we'll get more into it.
Yeah.
All right. C3 Arts Radio.
Thank you.
Check us out, c3artsradio.com. at C3 Arts Radio. That's Twitter and Instagram, C3 Arts Radio on Facebook. Thank you to Miss Grace Aniza Ali
Thank you both.
joining us today. The
Thank
great Tony
you.
the Tiger.
Grrr.
And we out, ladies and gentlemen. C3 Arts Radio.
Bye.
WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem.